Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Awasar. I'm Assistant Director for Academic Affairs at the African Studies Center at Michigan State University. This is Eye on Africa, our weekly speaker series. I'm very delighted today to welcome Dr. Tarila Marclint Ebiede, who is a a political scientist. He is an adjunct assistant professor of international relations at Vesalius College, Brussels, and associate researcher for the Center for Research on Peace and Development, Catholic University of Leuven, Belgium. He earned a PhD in social sciences from Catholic University of Leuven, Belgium. Dr. Ebiede's research straddles local level peace building, non-state governance in communities, youth, reintegration of ex-combatants, insecurity in the context of violent conflicts, and socio-political transition. Dr. Ebiede's talk is titled Youth Transition in Nigeria, Learning from the Past and Anticipating the Future. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Ebiede. We're glad to have you, and I pass it to you now.
Thank you very much, Professor Awa, for putting this together and for the invitation. I will have to say that my knowledge of MSU date back to when I was a teenager myself, and I was at a university in Nigeria. I earned my bachelor's degree at the Niger Delta University, Nigeria, in the southern coast of Nigeria. And during that period, I remember I was 18 going to 19 when one of your faculty at MSU then, Professor Rita Kiki Edozie, traveled to Nigeria for her field work. And when she came to the Niger Delta University and introduced herself as a professor of African American Studies at MSU. And since then, I've always had respect for MSU and look forward to actually visit MSU. So it was, I did not hesitate to accept this invitation, even though Professor Edozie has moved on now, but I did not hesitate to accept this invitation because of my own youth or teenage memories of the stories of MSU as told to me by Professor Edozie. So today it's a privilege that I am speaking to your community and also to other people who are registered, who are signed in onto this talk. As I have recollected my own teenage memories, which where I stand today are stories that have shaped my own transition from being a teenager to other part, to being an adult. It's important, it's a good background story, as today we will be talking about youth transitions in Nigeria. How young people move from being teenagers into adulthood. So I will just give a little background of my talk. Let me I'll have a PowerPoint to share with you. Let me share, yep. I'll give you a background of my talk yep. So I will be speaking about youth transitions in Nigeria, learning from the past and anticipating the future. Essentially, we want to understand youth transitions in Nigeria, the place of youth in Nigeria, the role of youth in the transformation of Nigeria. We'll learn from the past, as I've already stated, understand and explain current realities, and anticipate what does the future hold if we look at both the past and current realities? How can we predict the future of Nigeria based on youth transitions? Youth transitions, of course, youth transitions are essential, part of youth studies. It's in studying society, especially in sociology, in studying society, many scholars have looked at youth transitions as a way of understanding how society transits, how society changes, how society functions in different parts of the world. So let's first of all look at youth transitions. Definitions vary, but essentially, the key definitions of youth transition all roll around the point that youth transition refers to young people's journey from school to post-school study and onto employment. The emphasis, as you see, is moving from being young and taking responsibility for yourself in society. It is both a biological process, an economic process, and a socio-political process. If you look clearly, when we say biological process of becoming, imagine having the biological development, the different biological features of a youth, of a young person, moving from being a child to a teenager and to adulthood. This biological process can be considered as part of youth transition. But accompanying that biological process, which is natural, irrespective of the society, irrespective of the society that young people find themselves, that biological process must occur, except there are, and when it doesn't occur, now let us use this as a way of understanding what we will discuss in the next slides. When this biological process of transition from being a teenager or a young child, when it doesn't occur, it is assumed or it is considered that such a person is sick or have developmental challenges, to put it in a better way. Similarly, therefore, as young people move from being youth to adulthood, it is expected that by gaining skills, going to school, experiencing different forms of socialization, cultural socialization, political socialization, that in terms of economic sense, that they will be able to acquire skills that will enable them gain employment and pursue independent livelihoods, and as such, move away from being dependents to being providers in society. Similarly, we see the same thing for socio-political, when we say youth transition as a socio-political process. This happens when young people begin to take up new cultural and political roles in their society, when they begin to express their agency in the socio-political process of their society. Remember when we talked about the biological process of youth transition. If then failed transition in terms of biological growth of a youth, of a young person, if then that is incomplete or we observe challenges in that process, and therefore we come to the conclusion that that growth process is incomplete or is dysfunctional, or is a child, some children will be in Africa will be considered sick. Therefore, when a child or when a young person is unable to transit from being a dependent to becoming a provider, or when a young person is unable to transit from being a minor in society to becoming an individual with agency that is expressed in this socio-political process of their society, then we can also assume that there are challenges, or we will come to the conclusion that there are challenges in relation to that transition. In many aspects, in many parts of Africa, especially in countries like Nigeria, this has been the case, where young people have been unable to successfully transit, or that youth transition has been characterized by serious challenges that have stifled the growth of young people, limited their becoming, and undermined their own aspirations to contribute to the society that they belong to. But let's now go further and look into Nigeria, which is our case study, or where we are focusing on today. In Nigeria, youth is anyone between the ages of 18 to 29 years. Again, this is the Nigerian National Youth Policy 2019. But as you see, the United Nations definition of youth is between 15 to 24 years. This is different from the ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, which is the regional economic community, the REC of the West African region. And their definition is between 15 to 35 years. Just to give you an idea, before 2019, the last definition of youth in Nigeria was between 18 to 35 years. So definitions of youth vary. Who is a youth? How do you become a youth? It's therefore not just a biological process, but a political process, an economic process, a process that goes beyond natural outcomes, but determined by actors, institutions, individuals who shape young people and their outcomes. And also, it also depends on young people how they choose to define themselves. As you will see, for example, when you look at the category of Nigerians who fall under the number of people who are considered youth, by this definition in Nigeria, we're talking about 33 million people. This is 3 times the population, the total population of countries like Belgium, twice the total population of countries like Netherlands. So this is a significant population. And if we expand the youth bracket beyond 18 to 19 and say 15 to 35, then this figure automatically doubles, it increases. But I will capture it very clearly. Well, I think one statement that captures very clearly, which I included in this PowerPoint, is that youth, as I have already said, is politically defined. Therefore, when we are speaking or talking about youth, when we say YAGA, which is an organization in Nigeria, said one would remain a youth until one is married or has a job to meet personal and extended family responsibilities, or is able to move out of the family house. So therefore, in this sense, youth is not just about biological processes alone. That becoming, to take responsibility, to become an actor, to be able to express your agency in the socio-political and economic process of your society defines youth transitions in countries such as Nigeria. Therefore, beyond the numbers, youth in Nigeria is often politically defined. Let's then look at how young people have contributed to the transformation of Nigeria. If you look historically, youth have played important roles in the transformation of Nigeria. Needless to say, youth were active in anti-colonial movements in Nigeria. Important actors such as Ernest Ikoli, Kofi Abayomi, Eyo Eta, Nnamdi Azikiwe, Obafemi Awolowo, we are all members of the Nigerian youth movement that were active against colonial rule in Nigeria, in what is now considered Nigeria. In essence, if we pay attention to historical evolution of the Nigerian political process, as at that time, during anti-colonial struggles, the young people who emerged as anti-colonialists were among the first generation of Nigerians to gain Western education. And as such, by acquiring Western education, they are able to they are able to express their agency in the political process of their society, organizing, not just in Nigeria, but in London, in historical Black colleges in the United States, so for people such as Nnamdi Azikiwe, who studied in Lincoln, and many other parts of the world, in Paris, in Brussels, and other parts of the world, they were able to mobilize the Black identity and join the thriving Pan-African movement to express desires, to express their desire or their ambition to to reinforce the dignity of the Black man in that that period was during the Pan-Africanist movements of in the time past. But beyond military, beyond pre-anti-colonial struggles, we also see that youths were active when Nigeria gained independence. Young people were active in both military coups that shaped the political process, that transformed the country's politics and society. Young people were central. In fact, the young people, the people who carried out the first military coup in Nigeria were all young people, even when defined below 35. They were somewhere in the late 20s, somewhere in their early 20s, but none was above 35. So these young people, recognizing the social ills in their society, and I will have to say that by insight, you will see the limited understanding of how to drive change in their society, engaged in a military action that led to the end of the First Republic in Nigeria. But beyond military coup, young people were also active in pro-democracy movements. So young people were among young people in student movements, youth groups, these groups played important roles in demanding for the return of Nigeria to democracy in the late 70s, and in the early 70s and the late 70s. In essence, what I am saying, and when we look at studies on Nigerian literature of Nigerian politics, we come to a conclusion that Nigeria is an outcome of youth struggles. And when we say youth struggles, these struggles are not, while many will consider it as a means of shaping or contributing to the Nigerian society, it's also important that we look at youth struggles as I said in the beginning, as a way of becoming, as a means of transition, that young people are naturally tuned to transit from childhood, where their agency is limited, to one of adulthood, where their agency determines the outcomes in their society. Therefore, the outcomes we see in Nigeria, in a country like Nigeria, and this is well documented in different literature on Nigerian politics and Nigerian studies, that Nigeria, the outcome, what we see as Nigeria, although there are many factors that contribute, from colonialism to military rule, to post-colonial struggles, what we see as Nigeria is in itself an outcome of youth struggles. What can we learn, therefore, from the past? In that sense, what can we learn from youth contributions to Nigeria, to transformation of Nigeria? And how can we understand this transformation in context of youth transitions? As I have said already, that youth, since independence, Nigerian youth have engaged in struggles to contribute to nation building as a way of becoming. I mean, borrowing from Michelle Obama's book, The Becoming, or coming into adulthood. When we study young people, we sometimes undermine or do not reflect enough on their agency. When we look at society and when we look at young people in different ways, we do not pay attention of the frictions or the contestations that occur when they seek to become, when they seek to come into adulthood, which is in itself a natural process, as I have said. However, for politics and for society, youth seek to become by creating the society that they imagine. youth seeks to become by creating the society that they aspire to live in. Youth seeks to become, they come into adulthood by actively engaging in socio-political processes that will create the platform for which they will, that will guarantee, that will enable them to achieve or actualize their aspirations. These, I will argue, is often a natural process. How this is expressed, of course, is determined by sociological, political, and economic factors, which again we will discuss as we proceed. In Nigeria, this process of becoming has led to different outcomes. For example, the Nigerian Civil War. The Nigerian Civil War, which in itself have been blamed on issues, or scholars have argued that the Civil War is as a result of oil exploration, ethnicity, patronage politics, injustice, colonialism. Yet, the trigger for the outbreak of the Civil War can be directly linked to the first military coup in 1966. This coup, this event in itself was youth-led. When you read the literature from Why We Struck by Ademoyiga to other accounts, when you read accounts from Ifeanyi and many others, you will discern that the reasons given for youth engagement in a military coup was to actualize a nation that is in line with their vision and dreams. Many young people as at that time assumed that the Nigerian political elites are deviating from the Pan-Africanist ideals of justice, of prosperity, and that corruption, nepotism, and other vices have dominated the Nigerian public space as a result of the nature of politics. And those young people as at that time assumed that they can change, intervene, and use military rule to change the trend, the trajectory of the nation. In that way, we can clearly argue that in becoming, transiting, that young people as at that time struggled, or in their intentions were to develop, build a Nigeria of their dreams. This is in line with our theoretical claim of becoming, of transition as coming into adulthood, and in political sense as contributing to nation building. And following the outbreak of the war, significant number of young people, in fact, the war itself was prosecuted by young people. Nigeria's head of state, General Yakubu Gowon, at that time was himself a young person. The secessionist state of Biafra was led by Colonel Emeka Odumegwu Ojukwu, who was himself a young person. These processes, these fundamental processes that shaped Nigeria of today, the Nigeria that as we see, were driven, led, instigated, and led by young people as at that time. Beyond the war, we look at issues such as structural adjustment program, which many colleagues here will know, which is linked to international financial institutions, Bretton Woods institutions, imposing on states in Africa economic model policies that were meant to significantly impact on public funding for services such as education, healthcare, water, and other services. Young people protested against these policies. Organized, in fact, it developed the movements against structural adjustment, developed the political consciousness of young people or post-Civil War Nigerian youth. These movements fundamentally shaped their engagement with the Nigerian state. Significant protests were organized against military regimes who were seeking to implement these policies. The Nigerian Student Union, the National Association of Nigerian Students, different young youth movements emerged across the country to fight, to struggle against these policies that were considered anti-progressive in the Nigerian context. While fighting against structural adjustment program, these young people were also fighting against military rule. Young people were part of the struggle for democratic rule in Nigeria. In fact, they were the foot soldiers organizing protests, mobilizing people, and when especially in the early 90s, when there was a call for return to democracy, were at the heart for campaigning or mobilizing people to vote for different candidates that reflect their ideals. Let me pause and reflect a bit on what we have just discussed, or what I have just discussed. Despite these aspirations, these positive aspirations to build or to contribute to nation building, to the positive transformation of the Nigerian society, this was not the only response. This was not the only mechanism through which young people responded to the political dysfunctions or to the socio-political process of Nigeria. I say this because in that period, especially in the aftermath of the Civil War and military rule, the difficult economic times of the 80s and 90s, a significant number of young people exited the states. When I mean exit the state, they disengaged from the Nigerian state, pursuing their ambitions, seeking to coming into adulthood in different social contexts. This influenced or was one of the key reasons why we had brain drain, young people voting to leave Nigeria, moving to Europe, North America, and Asia, Middle East, and other parts of Africa, recognizing the limits of the Nigerian state, the limits the Nigerian society placed on them, and as such, realizing that they will not be able to become youths, that they are likely to remain as youth. When we say youth, is one will remain a youth until he is married or has a paid job or is able to move out of the family. Many realize that they will be unable to move out of their family house if they remain in Nigeria. Therefore, they voted to not remain in Nigeria, but move out of its shores to become. Therefore, youth transition, for those of you who are studying migration studies and other and mobility, let us also see youth transitions, mobility as youth transitions, mobility as becoming, mobility as coming into adulthood. For once you are able to move, to migrate, not only when you are able to contribute to the outcomes in the Nigerian society, not only when you are able to contribute to the struggles or to imagine a better Nigeria, becoming also involves moving away, migrating and seeking new avenues to express, to become an adult. This is something to reflect on. For not only when we move forward, it's something to think about, because not only are we these type of responses, this type of response, we can learn, we can understand the future of Nigeria from this type of response. We can understand the future of Nigeria from the response that involves engaging with the state, seeking to transform the state, and the response that disengages from the state. You see, we can learn from both responses, and we'll talk about that. Current realities. Nigeria's return to democratic rule provided new opportunities for positive outcomes in youth transitions in Nigeria. For example, in 1999, following the return to democratic rule, there was a deliberate campaign by the then administration of President Olusegun Obasanjo to engage young people at home and in diaspora, especially for those abroad, to return home with their expertise and contribute to nation building and development. At home, there was deliberate policies designed to contribute to youth employment, to open the economy, and to include or engage young people in the socio-political process. This was not always successful, but in some the return to democratic rule created new conditions, created new opportunities for young people to reimagine their transition in line with democratic ethos and values in the Nigerian society. However, if there is any time that we will not understand the impact of Nigeria's politics on youth transitions, perhaps Nigeria's return to democratic rule provided is a perfect example to understand the impact of Nigeria's politics on youth transitions. Let's reflect on this a little bit. Following the return of Nigeria to democratic rule in 1999, while many young people were able to gain education and seek and become and grow into adulthood, and as such contribute to the Nigerian society, a significant number of them, many who were unable to develop their capacities as a result of weak or poor economic conditions of the 80s and the 90s, were unable to seize the opportunities presented to them by the democratic rule. In that sense, again, this is another point, is how can society manage youths that have experienced failed transitions, economic transitions, political transitions, biological transitions? Oftentimes we refer them to medical processes, but how do we manage youths whose transition into adulthood have not been successful, or are stressed if they are still in that process? In societies like Nigeria, where politics is patronage-driven and involves violence, where institutions are weak, political actors will exploit these failed transitions to mobilize young people in ways that advance their interest in power, but denies or undermines the potential or the transition of this young people. Again, let's reflect on this. When institutions are weak, therefore, for example, universities are unable to give the form of education that is required for young people to actualize their visions for society. It makes them vulnerable to exploitation, political exploitation, and as such, their visions, their transitions will not allow them, their transitions will not lead to the desired outcomes of coming into adulthood. Or even when they do, the outcomes is not what is desired. Failure of Nigeria's institutions to facilitate smooth transitions for young people have created new tensions in the country. And this is where I want to reflect more on. It's something to reflect on because recently many people have heard about the ENDSARS protests in Nigeria. And in fact, that is what led to this invitation by MSU for this talk. One way you can see the failure of Nigeria's institutions to facilitate smooth transition is in the failure of the security institutions to protect young people. It is in the failure of the security institutions to ensure rule of law, justice, and social order. Instead, the weak institutions in Nigeria, especially exemplified by the security institutions, especially the Nigerian police, have instead evolved into an exploitative arm of the Nigerian political elite, one that seeks to victimize, one that seeks to undermine, one that seeks deliberately to attack and to criminalize youth in Nigeria. We see that these have led to tensions, political tensions. It has led to economic tensions. It has led to socio-cultural tensions. So, for example, when we say socio-cultural tensions, young people transitions also involve their imagination, cultural imaginations. And by saying cultural imaginations, we talk about young people who are into cultures that are alien, that are external and acquired from the internet, social media, studying, education, and other forms of socialization. These cultures, for example, wearing tattoos or keeping dreads or music, for many actors in Nigerian institutions, these forms of self-expression are themselves criminal. Not that they should be criminal, not that they are criminal by law, but any form of difference that is not sanctioned, difference that is not facilitated by Nigeria's patriarchal elites is seen as criminal and is punished. In many ways, when we also look at the failure of institutions to facilitate economic transitions, we should also think about young people who are engaging in economic activities beyond the formal means in the Nigerian state, beyond the Nigerian formal economy. Many have engaged in online trading. Many are engaged in Bitcoin transactions. Many are engaged in sales, informal forms of sales that involve the use of electronic equipment such as laptops, telephones, gadgets, and all that. Again, while young people are responding to the failure of the state to facilitate their transitions, the state institutions are criminalizing such young people, attacking them. Of course, there are criminal aspects of these transitions. For example, young people who are engaged in internet fraud. Let me go to the question of how young people have responded. Young people in response have resorted to protests such as the ENDSARS movement, which I will talk about in the next slide. Innovations. Nigeria, if you go on news, Nigerians, young people in Nigeria are developing new technologies, payment systems, products, online products, and offline products that seeks to ease the living conditions, to improve the living conditions, and to facilitate business in the country. And again, remember, it's what we are, remember our last discussion, the previous slide where we explained how young people escaped. Again, a significant number of young people are choosing to escape. They choose not to protest. They choose not to innovate, but they choose to escape to societies where they can become, where they can grow into adulthood, where they can contribute meaningfully. Protests, innovation, escape, all these are legitimate means of responding to the social dysfunction, the political dysfunctions in the Nigerian society. Therefore, youth transitions in Nigeria is one that is determined, or that is shaped by how young people respond to the political dysfunction, socio-political and economic dysfunctions in the Nigerian society. Protests is an important way, it's an important mechanism, not only to respond to the situation, but also to understand the Nigerian society, to understand the trajectory of the Nigerian society. How young people protest, the sacrifices they make, and the response of the Nigerian state give us insights into what is possible in the Nigerian society. I want to talk about this young man, Onifade Pelumi. In reflecting on SARS, he was not more than 20 years old, just 20 years old, when the ENDSARS protests broke out. As he was still in the university, is just a typical young man in the process of transition. I want this image, I choose this image, I don't want this talk to be a regular talk of an academic or intellectual or someone sharing his views, but I want to center the realities of young people in Nigeria in your imagination. If you will forget anything that I share today, don't forget this boy. Don't forget his memory, Onifade Pelumi. He was killed in Lagos during the ENDSARS protests. This is a boy who was still in the university, a second year, third year student studying history. He is like my brother. I imagine my brother studying history and diplomacy and killed. This young man and millions, thousands of other young Nigerians turned out in October 2020 to protest the institutional failure of the states, of state institutions, the failure of state institutions to guarantee the rights of young people in Nigeria. What they did by protesting was expressing hope. Without hope, people will not protest. When you reflect in the American society, for example, Martin Luther King and several other civil rights activists that protested, that choose to stay in the United States and fight for a better society. Activism in itself, when properly done, is an expression of hope. Therefore, people like Onifade Pelumi, who went out to protest and to contribute one way or the other to demand for respect of human rights, respect for young people, and a new deal for the Nigerian youth, were expressing hope. In response, he was killed. He was killed by agents of the Nigerian state who are still in denial till today. His body was found, and as we speak, is yet to be buried. His body has not been released to his family. This is the frustrations. These are the frustrations experienced by young people who choose to respond to the realities of the Nigerian society. This is what shapes, so while there are a significant number of people who will become tech giants or successful innovators who will migrate and escape, the fate of this young man is one that is experienced by many young people in their transitions to becoming. So for example, Onifade Pelumi was not allowed to become, he was not allowed to grow into adulthood. He was not allowed to leave his father's house. He was not allowed to be a contributor, or in fact, he was cut short in the process of contributing to the Nigerian society by agents of the Nigerian state. The ENDSARS movement significantly rocked the socio-political consciousness of the Nigerian society, afraid of the young people. And instead of seizing this opportunity as a means of reconstructing the social contract between young people and society and the state, and understanding this in context of youth transitions, the state chose to repress, the Nigerian state chose to nip this movement in the bud. But I don't think this is the end of ENDSARS. ENDSARS will continue, and we will discuss that in the near future. What does the future hold? Youth will continue to play important roles in shaping Nigeria's future. Young people like Onifade Pelumi will continue to engage with the Nigerian state. Important that how young people respond to the realities, current realities in Nigeria, will go a long way in determining Nigeria's future. Whether they move, they choose to protest, or they choose to engage in informal economy or innovate through technology, all these actions, as it was during the Nigerian Civil War, during colonialism, during military rule, these actions, the actions young people take today, as whether or not the political elites like it or not, or whether they, as with the biological process, they will become, whether they become functional adults or whether they become dysfunctional adults, it's based on, it will be determined by their experiences, they gather in their transition. Organic youth movements such as ENDSARS provide a rays of hope for Nigeria. It indicates that young people are still willing to facilitate their transition into political adulthood by negotiating for an inclusive, safe, and prosperous country. It shows that despite the challenges experienced by young people, despite the dysfunctional nature of institutions in Nigeria, and if you have paid attention to this talk, I have emphasized on institutions, not just individual political elites, patronage claims, but the weak institutions, which in developed societies, political parties, police, youth groups, different institutions facilitate this transition. Religious institutions, the church, the mosque, even secret societies, fraternities, facilitate this transition. But in the Nigerian context, these institutions are weak, are dysfunctional, and as such now affects young people and their own transition. Clearly, the governing elites in these different institutions their response does not seem to encourage this renewed interest of young people in the Nigerian state. To a large extent, prior to ENDSARS, and in many ways, there was some form of apathy, political apathy among young people. Young people hardly vote. There was an election in Abia State the other day, last week, and only 4% of the registered voters, 4% of 300 and something thousand in one district went out to vote. How can 4% determine outcome of an election? But political participation is not limited to voting. Protest is a form of political participation. Protest is a form of political engagement. Therefore, ENDSARS protest should be seen as a political engagement and given its due recognition. And it shouldn't be suppressed. It should be negotiated with. In conclusion, How young people will respond to the actions taken by governing elites in response to protest movements such as ENDSARS will determine the future of Nigeria. Whether they choose to escape, whether they choose to innovate, or whether they choose to engage politically, either by protest or voting or other forms of mobilization, will shape the future of Nigeria. Once again, I want to leave you with the picture of this young man, Onifade Pelumi. While there are significant majority of Nigerian youths do not die by the bullets, but the fate of this man is one that is experienced by many young people in Nigeria. Their transition cut short, stifled, undermined by the very state that should protect them. Their response, even in death, their memories, even in death, will shape the future of Nigeria. He is dead, but I believe that I will remember people like Onifade Pelumi, who to a large extent determine the future or the new Nigeria, or if we will maintain the old Nigeria as it is. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ebiede, for very important and insightful presentation. We appreciate that. So please type your question on the Q&A if you have some. And I think I already saw 2 questions. Maybe we can start with the first one by Grace. It says, historically, Nigeria is an outcome of youth struggle, but today those youth who were the drivers of today's Nigerian society are still holding key positions and blocking access of today's youth to the power that people in power, are white-knuckling. Are today's Nigerian youth in the same position to determine tomorrow's outcomes of their parents' work? I think you touch on that, but if you want to elaborate.
Let me respond already to that. That is a very important and really valuable question, in the sense that young people in the 60s and 70s who shaped the outcomes of Nigeria are still in power today. If I will reflect on that, I will even consider that as a failure of youth transition. This is why youth transition is very important. Because of their own failed transition, and dysfunctional transition, that they are unable to develop mechanisms that will facilitate the emergence of new youth elites, new young people into the political space, to center the imagination of young people in this society, in the Nigerian society. So I have reflected on that myself, and to a large extent, it's something to reflect more on. But this is why I think that one way to understand the challenges of the Nigerian society is through youth transitions and failed youth transitions, dysfunctional youth transitions in themselves. Even their transitions, the transitions of those who in the past were youths but remain in power, were not particularly successful. I hope that answers your question, or at least provides insights.
Thank you. This person wants to know if young people who died before the ENDSARS should be acknowledged.
Thank you very much. I think that that's a good question. I do think that before Onifade many young people have been victims of police brutality or have been killed. In the Niger Delta, in the Southeast, many have been killed. But I choose to use my intellectual privilege to center the case of Onifade Pelumi. This is because during the ENDSARS protests, he was not the only young person that died. But it was very challenging for me to see him because his image was really vivid, live. It wasn't a pleasant situation. And I mean, I'm not saying other people have not experienced unpleasant situation, but this is an example that can spur us to think. It is a case study, it's an example. And I am not saying others are just statistics or numbers. They have names, they have memories. But for this context, I want us to remember this man, this young man, and what his dreams and visions for Nigeria mean for youth transitions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I just want to add on that point how important it is for this need for memorializing the youth, because I am originally from Senegal, and we always have this discussion about many youth dies, and as you explained it very well, their action is political, and instead of being engaged with as a political actions, most of the time the reaction to these protests is just brutality, violence. And you see that this failure of memorialization has its consequences. Because if I take Senegal, for instance, before, in the last couple of weeks, there was some violence that the youth were requesting. But the same thing happened, because in the past, the youth that paid a price for standing up, for speaking up, they were not memorized. They were forgotten. And the same, so we have this sense of repetition, like it's the same thing over. So I think it's very important that in the past, in the present, everybody needs to be, those people who fight, who stand up, and definitely the youth need to be memorialized. And we have a question here by Moji. Thank you for a very thorough analysis of the current realities of the Nigerian state and its youth. Given the bleak realities you have painted, what do you predict the next decade holds for Nigeria's youth? Do you have any suggestion for how the youth can emancipate themselves from the perennial centrifugal forces that seek to hold them back?
Thank you very much for that, Kristen Moji Obasa. Political science is not it's not medical science. We predict with caution, knowing that outcomes could be determined by several factors that are beyond our control. But if you look at the future, if you look at the current realities in Nigeria, you will see, for example, if we let's it's good that you already limit our time to the next decade. If you will see that it is one that we will see continuous contestation. Young people will continue to contest for space. Young people will continue to contest for economic space and inclusion. And as Nigeria grows, this is a country that will become, its population will have about 300 million Nigerians in the next 20 years, thereabout. And as the country, as we move towards that 300 million, as the country move towards that, I say we, because I am Nigerian, we will see increased contests for scarce resources. And therefore, this is not doomsday prophecy, but it is a reality that if there is no deliberate attempt by international and local actors to improve on the institutions that service different sectors of the Nigerian state, that the contestations will continue. And that is why I said ENDSARS is not the end. Protests will continue in through different platforms or mechanisms. So what should young people do? I do not have a clear advice. I do not have a clear advice for young people for what they should do or what they shouldn't do. But I think that it is important for young people to recognize their agency and to recognize their own capacity, their value, that their relevance, and that the future of the Nigerian state, the future of Nigeria, depends on their actions or inactions. What they choose to do with that knowledge, I leave that to them. Thank you.
Thank you. Samuel, you can talk. I think you can unmute yourself now. Okay, so while we figure it out, I will read another question from Grace. Do you see the Boko Haram activities in Nigeria as an expression of youth frustration and activism, albeit a violent and unhealthy expression?
Several scholars have argued in that line. And while there are many factors, again, that will explain the outbreak of Boko Haram conflicts, the mobilization of young people in northern Nigeria into armed groups, and also in the Niger Delta and other parts of Nigeria, is a classical case of failed youth transition. Failed youth transition where young people are unable or may have received poor education, weak education, or young people have been socialized in ways that are inimical to democratic norms and civil values. It is a failure of youth transition, the Boko Haram recruitment of young people into Boko Haram and the outbreak of Boko Haram conflicts in general. It is a failure of youth transition. If we critically examine it, young people who are unable to pursue to engage in productive economic activities, or young people who are unable to express their views or engage politically, or who are recruited to engage in violent politics, morph of gradually shift towards extremist views. But it also, in context of youth transition, it's also open. It's also that several bubbles, or that there are existing several spaces where extremist ideas can thrive. And this is not only in Nigeria, in the United States, in Europe, in Southeast Asia, you see where young people unable to politically become find themselves engaged, or unable to politically become, to grow into political adulthood in the mainstream of society, find themselves engaged in extremist ideas, in bubbles, isolated bubbles that turn around to violently shape or transform society, as in the case of Boko Haram. So indeed, yeah, I agree with you. Thank you.
Samuel, were you able to unmute? Okay, I will have to bring you to a panelist. Maybe that will work. One question before I do that. Given the importance of youth and young adults in Uganda's opposition, do you have any thoughts to share from your political science perspectives on what's happening there or any other cases across the continent?
Thank you very much. I am not an expert on Uganda, so I would not claim expertise on Uganda. However, I would again refer you to the debate on youth transitions in Africa. In this sense, we are talking about the youth bulge or youth probably not youth bulge, but youth movement in the continent. That young people, irrespective of where they are in the continent, are seeking to engage in the political process of their society. I'm not an expert on Uganda, and so therefore I would not make very strong or conclusive statements on that. But if we want to understand the continent in the broad terms, in general terms, I will say that it is an expression of the desires of young people to shape the outcomes of the society. It's an expression of youth transitions or contested youth transitions in the continent.
Can you try, Samuel, one more time?
Huh?
Samuel? Leo, can you speak?
I'm sorry.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I raised my hand by mistake. I'm very sorry about that.
Okay, no problem. Go ahead. It seems we can hear Samuel now. Go ahead, Samuel.
I'm saying it was an error. I touched the raise hand button accidentally. So I didn't intend to raise my hand, but I'm listening from Uganda in Kampala.
Oh, very good. Thank you. No,
yeah.
no problem. Okay, so going.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me? It's Leo.
Yeah, I can hear you, Leo. It's fine. I'll take you off in a minute. I'm just gonna. Yeah. I'm gonna read a question for you, Dr. Ebiede. Thanks for your presentation. You seem to isolate ENDSARS rather than see it as part of a larger culture of using violence to achieve our desire. What's the question?
I think I understand the question. I have read it. So it says,
okay, go ahead.
In 1966, Easterners were slaughtered in the north because they were no longer welcome there. I do not think that I isolated ENDSARS. I think if we follow my discussion, ENDSARS is a natural outcome of a society that has been engaged in protests and violence. I do not isolate ENDSARS in any way. I think ENDSARS is part of the political process of Nigeria. It is a reflection. What is unique in the sense of ENDSARS is how dynamic it was, how the level of organization, and how it is not linked to the typical ethnic mobilization that characterize protest movements, social movements, political movements in opposition to the government in Nigeria. Where young people, it is one of the times where the grievances of young people were shared across ethnic lines. Of course, this is not the first time, but it was also one of the, let me also put an example. There are 200 million Nigerians right now. Each of, wherever they are, Nigerians have, for each person, there is a unique grievance. So if you have 200 million Nigerians, you have 200 million grievances in Nigeria. That is a given. But what is missing is a shared vision. What do we want? There was only one point in ENDSARS that was shared by everybody who was involved: end police brutality, whether against Hausa, Yoruba, Igbo, Ogoni, Ijaw, Nupe, and police brutality. That is what makes this movement unique. And this shared vision for Nigeria, which is lacking at the political level, at the social level, at the cultural level, was expressed by young people. This is why I emphasize on it. This is not to deny the role of violence in shaping socio-political outcomes in Nigeria, from the Nigerian Civil War to the massacres that have occurred, to the riots in Kano and Kaduna, to the Niger Delta militancy, to OPC, Odua People's Congress movement in Lagos and the Southwest, to the Biafra IPOB movement now that we see. Violence is at the heart of the Nigerian society. It is wrong to deny that. But to focus on ENDSARS is to open our eyes to the possibilities, which leads me to the next question. What can be done? What other processes do you think that the Nigerian youth can follow? I do, as you rightly said, I do not think the ENDSARS has come to an end. People are still engaged in the process, but what needs to be done is to maintain this trajectory, to engage. What Nigerian youth needs to do is to engage, to mobilize beyond the urban space, to mobilize, to speak beyond the class space, an intersectional movement that cuts across ethnicity, class. As I have said, ENDSARS moves beyond the ethnicity and class, but beyond the urban to the rural, extends that framework and mobilize society, mobilize young people. Let me address one issue here. Despite the popularity of ENDSARS, there was limited mobilization in certain parts of Nigeria. It seems to me that despite the grievances of Nigerian youths, the different grievances, that there is still need to develop and to align the visions of young people irrespective of where they come from in the country. Therefore, movements that will seek to facilitate youth transitions, such as ENDSARS, and need to develop a shared vision that can be shared by the Almajiri in Kaduna, in Kano, in Sokoto, in Borno, and the Basi and the Kaite and Tarila and Basi Obi in Onitsha, Port Harcourt, Uyo, or Pelumi Onifade in Lagos, Uyo, or other places of Nigeria. Thank you.
Thank you. Chinwe has a question. So thank you for your thought-provoking presentation. However, your presentation gives the impression that youth in Nigeria are a homogeneous group. There are at least two broad categories that I have seen. The first have been described as the builders. These are the youth that led the ENDSARS movement. They have a clear agenda of what they hope to achieve and are organized and systematic. The second are the burners, who are prone to disrupt and destroy. How do you reconcile the two?
Thank you very much. This group took over. Yeah, there were two different. I agree with you that the presentation seemed to present the Nigerian youth as homogeneous, but this is not the case. If we move beyond the broader narrative that I've been providing, when you look at the contestations, in context of contestations, there of course cannot be an homogeneous group contesting. These groups are, youth is an heterogeneous social unit. Hence, people from different classes, from different ethnicities, from different religion, from different sexual orientations, in fact, from different political views or political parties, form the youth body. And these different values are expressed during protest movements. So for example, during the ENDSARS protest movement, people, lesbians, LGBT people mobilized and joined the movement. And in response, some other youths expressed homophobia towards this group. So in no way, and it shows the contradictions, even inherent in youth movements and youth transitions. In no way is this an homogeneous group. But I also will disagree with your categorization of the builders and the burners. Why do you assume that the young people who went to break into the ShopRite malls and other malls and warehouses are necessary burners? Why don't you examine them as people whose transitions into youth have been stifled or have not become? For anyone who has become, who arrived into whose transition has been successful, will not engage in that form of expression. Vandalism as expression. This is not to deny their agency, but it's to understand the sociological process, the economic realities, and the socialization that will make someone, young or old, especially a youth, whose future, it's like to blame the black child, the black boy in Atlanta, who socialized into violence, finds himself in prison at the age of 17 or 18, without paying attention to the socio-political process inherent in the American society that makes young black men susceptible to jail time. And this is not a linear process. It's not. People who you consider builders can themselves become burners. It's a fluid process. And to divide them into two groups alone itself limits the heterogeneous context, the heterogeneous nature of these groups. So I agree that these youth groups are heterogeneous, youth transitions movements are heterogeneous, but it's not either or, it's fluid. I study violent societies and conflict societies, and we see young people who are engaged as combatants transiting to become peace advocates or peace ambassadors, and again transiting to become violent actors, depending on context. So the people who you see described as burners can at some point can be builders. And those people you see as builders can be mobilized politically to pursue the agenda of institutions and actors that undermines the transition of other young people to become, especially elites, youths in Nigeria have been identified in helping shaping political narratives that sustain the status quo and as such undermine the transition of other young people to become. Being a burner or a builder is not necessarily by destroying buildings and houses and plantation and warehouses, but you could be a burner disguising as a builder by developing coherent narratives for political elites used to undermine the transitions of other young people. These are complex issues, and we need to reflect on them carefully before we take a stand. So that's why I'm also careful not to place someone in a particular category or not. But thank you very much. That's a very, very interesting and very brilliant question. Thank you, Chinwe.
At the follow-up, she's saying if you think that the two can come together for a more impactful movement.
As I said, I don't think there is a two group. It's a fluid group, and as such, I do not think that this is just one or the other, and that this needs to be merged. I think from where I stand and from my understanding and from my own research, it seems to me that the emphasis should be on developing a shared vision, irrespective of your social, political, economic, ethnic, religious, or cultural background.
Thank you so much. We have two questions that we can combine. I think Chris has a question. What do you think should be the role of African leaders in this youth transition? Do you think African leaders are deliberately repressing its youth? And we have Anne's question. What strategies has the Nigerian state put in place to de-escalate the dysfunctional youth transition? How have these strategies failed and succeeded? I say this because in Kenya, the government set up work for youth, National Youth Service, etc., but these have not worked effectively due to poor management and corruption. So maybe you can answer those two questions.
Thank you, Annie. That is, in Nigeria, one institution that is designed, in fact, youth transition is not one that is not recognized by the Nigerian government or Nigerian state. It is recognized. The Nigerian National Youth Service, similar to the National Youth Service in Kenya, which exists also in Ghana, Uganda, and in several other African countries, Tanzania, and several other African countries. Also, it's there in Nigeria. We have recently conducted a study, longitudinal research for the last 5 years at the Catholic University of Leuven, where I'm a research fellow, studying the transition, the impact of the National Youth Service on youth transitions, especially in relation to social contacts and how it shapes youth outcomes. We see that these institutions have not been able to facilitate, to prepare young people for the opportunities or to young people for their transition, especially in terms of gaining employment. And in many instances, have not had the desired impact in terms of developing a shared national identity in the country. So social contacts in different, serving in a different society. So for example, in National Youth Service, in Ghana, in Nigeria, you are posted to serve outside of your state of origin or your place of birth or where you studied. So you are posted to have a new experience. But research has shown that there is no, the impact is very limited. But we also see from these studies that youth transition is determined by several other factors, not just these institutions. So the state, while it recognizes this is why I return back. This is why I have chosen to use a analysis of institutional analysis, focusing on the weakness of state institutions. So the institutions are weak, even institutions that are supposed to facilitate these youth transitions are weak. And again, for the Nigerian society, for the Nigerian case of the National Youth Service, it is targeted at people who go on to university. A significant number of young people never go to university in Nigeria. So there is no design, there is no framework, therefore, to respond to the need of this population that don't go on to university. Thank you.
Thank you. Anonymous writes, ENDSARS is not ethnically, okay, I cannot say the word.
So I can take it from there. ENDSARS is not ethnically motivated because SARS hasn't targeted. So do you not agree that when violence is primarily unleashed against specific groups, that these groups have the right to address their victimization has been, and is it not true that ENDSARS would not involve multi-ethnic participation if SARS only targeted specific ethnic groups? I think this is an important question, but it does, the theme of this debate, this talk is not on ENDSARS. ENDSARS is the end, the final, only a specific part of Nigeria's history, which I have discussed over step by step. So I would not want to respond. I understand the grievance and the issues. I myself being a minority and someone from the Niger Delta, I understand these issues very well, and I experienced, for example, the Niger Delta militancy, where the Niger Delta people were marginalized, attacked, and brutalized by the Nigerian government. there was no national mobilization. Again, this is why I make the point that to develop a national response in Nigeria should not be based on grievances, because grievances alone doesn't mobilize people across ethnic lines. But to develop a national response in Nigeria should be based on a vision, a national vision. And this vision should speak to the human identity, human dignity, which is linked that every human being has the right to recognize your dignity, center the dignity of the human being in the mobilization. I agree with you to the general points about violence and ethnicity in Nigeria, but that's not the topic we are dealing with today. But it is something to reflect on. Why don't we have national mobilizations when specific ethnic groups or minorities are targeted? It's because the experience of grievance is different. 200 million Nigerians, 200 million grievance. If you mobilize based on your own grievance, other people will not join you. But if you mobilize based on a shared vision, other people will join you because they share in that vision. And finally, we have one more question. How can we involve the Afro-diasporic community on humanitarian development? How can we create international global shared ideas? Is Nigeria open to more Afrocentric communal approach to resolving Africa's problem? This is a very interesting question, and I myself, sharing Pan-Africanist values, can connect very well to these questions. It is important to think about these issues in terms of what is possible. But despite the criticism of the African diaspora community, the African diaspora in today's globalized world play an important role in mainstreaming Africa's realities to the world. For example, during protests and during riots in Africa, the role the diaspora play when internets are cut short in African societies, in African countries, the role the diaspora play in holding their own governments as accountable. In fact, let me be clear, that despite the frustrations and limitations of the African diaspora, they are in a privileged position because they are citizens of powerful governments. And when organized and demand of their governments to take action, they can influence outcomes at the global scale. For example, the African diaspora community, when organized in the United States of America, or organized around their local electoral units, they can, for example, mobilize their representatives in Congress to demand for actions against institutions, oppressive institutions in the continent. This is not to colonize or to intervene, but should be informed, should informed by a rigorous understanding of the context in which you are mobilizing. This is why it is important for the African diaspora community to engage with the African society. This is why we need a Pan-Africanist movement, one that is developed based on the shared dignity, shared identity of the Black man. It is important also that we as Africans see that these linkages are not just political or cultural, but are tied to our very survival and existence in today's world. As you know, countries in Africa, such as Ghana, have developed mechanisms for diaspora people to return. All evidence in Nigeria points that there is no coordinated means, there is no coordinated platform for such a return. But that does not mean that many people have not returned. Through cultural exchange, education exchange, religious exchange, and other forms of engagement, there have been exchange, we have seen linkages between the diaspora community and Nigerian society. So there are opportunities for that. Explore it if you want to, and think critically in exploring this. do so in a way to enhance your understanding of the Nigerian society. Thank you.
That's the end of this Eye on Africa. Thank you so much, Dr. Ebiede, for coming and sharing. And thank you for a very stimulating conversation. We very much appreciate that. And thank you to everybody who attended today, asked questions. We'll see you next Thursday. Bye, everybody.